Hi guys, thank you so much for coming. This is a topic that really interests me, and I hope that you'll also be interested in it when I'm done talking about it. I want to kind of set a little bit of background. I really enjoy art history and what it means to have art represented or have humanity represented in art movements. One of the things that's really interesting about art is it represents both the human figure as the individual and humanity as a whole, and how they change their history in art movements based on social culture of the time and beliefs of the people creating the art. So in essence, art is a representation of the culture of humanity at the time, and embodies the collective mindset of humanity, or the progressive mindset of humanity at that time. It follows changes in human identity, and these are a few examples of art movements that spread through Europe and the United States from the 1500s to present day. I will start by saying medieval art preceded all these different art movements that I'm going to talk about, and it is different from the rest of these art movements because it was not considered necessarily beautiful. Art in medieval times was out of utility. It was used for telling stories. It was used for explaining things. The church used it as a tool to teach people who were illiterate, and so art wasn't about glorifying humanity. It wasn't about being beautiful. It was about how is this useful when we use this and tell people stories. There was no technique. In this photo, I picked it because you can't really see any depth here. Like, there are people in the background and everything, but size is not relative. Depth is not a thing. Shadows aren't a thing. And it's really interesting when you move into Renaissance art how everything changes and technique changes. These are a couple of examples of Renaissance art pieces. This is the introduction of accuracy of the human form, and it starts a progression of the representation of the human form as a beautiful entity. Human beauty is considered inherent. So when Renaissance artists were painting, they said, okay, the human body in and of itself is beautiful. How can I present this in the most accurate and beautiful way? And part of that was because of the humanism at the time, and the idea of the individual, and why the individual is important, and because God made man, man is beautiful. Our next argument, maybe, is realism, and it kind of has the same idea. You take the individual and you glorify it, but instead of being very over the top or like grand, this art movement really takes like humanity in its broken down form, in its base. It is mundane, it is average, and that's what these artists were trying to represent, is that these people in their average lives were still worth representing in art. They were still beautiful. Humanity is still beautiful. One of the really cool things about this art movement is they started to introduce gore and grossness and like blood and death, decay, disease, all that kind of stuff that was already in the world and people knew about it, but it wasn't glorified in art. And I think that's because they were afraid of it, and during this art movement, realists were like, no. We want to show people how they really are. Hubbard says that the goal of realism is to show exactly what the artist saw and to prove it in every way possible, even if it offended people. So this was a bit of a progressive art movement in trying to show realness. Some people didn't like that. They didn't appreciate the fact that mundane life was being exposed, I guess, and they didn't think that that was important. But these realism artists really wanted to show how important average human life is and how humanity is beautiful, even if it's disgusting or gross or bloody. And that was super important to show humanity as a whole and as this thing that is important, you know, because people in this art movement understood, you know, okay, humanity is beautiful, humanity is great, whatever, but these artists really wanted to show that even the bad parts were good. This next art movement is called Romanticism. It started about 1800s. This is where art kind of switches gears. Like, we're all about glorifying the human body, like being accurate. This art movement takes all that away. Instead of glorifying the human body, they glorify God and nature. And they try to put humans in their place in nature, which is why this tiny little person, while he's here, is very, very small. And that's not to say that humans are insignificant. It's just to say that humanity is powerless against God and nature. This movement also wanted to get people back to basics. It was kind of like a call to action, right? So these art pieces were saying, oh no, we need to abandon industrialism. We don't like all this machinery. It's like infecting our kids. It's infecting our lives. It's terrible. We want to get back to nature, back to basics, and we want to be pure people in God's environment in nature. This art movement is called Impressionism. It started about 1860s. People are, again, represented very prominently in this art movement. The thing that's new about Impressionism is that brushstrokes and technique were used to show perspective. So an artist would see a version of a situation and paint it how they wanted it to be seen. And this brought emotion into it. It brought feelings and perspective and relative representation. So people still look very much like people, but it's not necessarily accurate. It doesn't need to be. It can be a representation of something beautiful. So, for example, this painting on the left is of a girl, but it's not necessarily accurate, right? But you can see that it's a girl, and you can see that she's very beautiful and saying somewhere very serene. But the feeling that the artist wants you to feel is the most important part of this painting, not necessarily being accurate to what the girl looks like. This is further taken in Expressionism. So the human body is no longer an important part of art. Like a human being recognizable is. So like you can see these people, like while they don't necessarily look like people, you can recognize them as such. But the important part of Expressionism is the emotion. And during Expressionism, people were kind of in pain, and they used that pain in their art. You know, we talk about art or writers being really like sad and depressed and using all that pain and being really good writers. You know, you use that trauma and you create something really beautiful. That's really similar with Expressionists. They take all that internal pain, loss of affection and love, grief, despair, fear, attachment, separation, death, all of those elements, and they put them in their paintings. And it doesn't matter what the person looks like, it matters what you feel when you look at it. So their human emotions are represented in the art through these colors and brushstrokes and the non-accuracy of the human form. Cubists come out of Expressionism, and they are a type of Expressionism. This is about 1910. Cubists characterize their art as a defamiliarization of the human body. So they deconstruct it and reconstruct it in a very angular way. Part of Cubism is to show double meaning. So they force perspective so you can see things at angles which you would not normally see. And like this one on the left, this painting is called Weeping Woman. It's by Picasso. And the things that he was trying to show in this are, you know, that there's more people, right, than what you see on the surface. So there's something underneath. And he does that with color, with lines, like her face is all twisted up on the inside, or on the inner part of this painting. And Expressionism, or Cubism, really, really wanted to show that people were so multidimensional, and that humanity was multidimensional, and that people were more than what they seem on the outside. In 1915, Dadism emerged. It was a satirical art form that came out of the war. People were really upset with how the world was going. They were upset with the leaders, they were upset with humanity, and in an effort to try to bring these grievances to light, they created art. And it was all mockery. It was making fun of the current climate, the current social climate. And a really interesting thing about Dadism is it doesn't call out just one person necessarily. It calls out humanity and groups of people, and it says, this is not right. Like, it calls attention to social issues and injustices and the flaws that are in humanity. And this is where art starts to become kind of a tool that is used for progression and things like that. It covered topics from like corrupt leaders and war and examination of self and its place in society. And I really love how Dadism is like, it's like a self-check, you know, like, hey, humanity, we need to get our act together. But in the early 1900s, abstract art became a thing. It was no longer depicting people or things or anything. And it was just an expression of human emotion. And for a lot of people, this really resonated. So instead of having to look at a painting and, you know, discover, okay, what does it mean to have this person in this way? You can look at a painting and say, I feel this when I look at that. So like, I feel happy when I look at the circle, or I feel really sad when I look at this dark piece over here. And part of abstract art is to connect to people on an emotional level. Instead of having visual or specific visual elements, it has emotional visual elements. The three things that are important to abstract art are that the individual creating the piece expresses their emotions and experiences, the person viewing the art relates to it in some way, and that both parties derive meaning. And a lot of people say, oh, I could do that, you know? Oh, my kid could do that. But that's not the point of abstract art. The point of abstract art is to convey internal meaning and connect with somebody. And if your child can do that, like, good for them. But the point is to try to get that human experience on a deeper level through art. In the 1950s, pop art emerged as a popular style for youth. It was low cost, mass-produced, expendable, witty, gimmicky, sexy, glamorous. It was an enjoyable art form, and it was for progression. So pop art, which was, like I said, expendable, was kind of produced on this level of, okay, we want young people to enjoy this, but we want it to mean something. So it tackled social injustices and like it was a tool used for feminism, and it called out gender norms and misogyny and all that kind of stuff. Like this photo on the left over here, it's one of my favorites. It handles serious issues in a light manner that allows young people, especially, to rally around it and say, yeah, I know, I see that. I see you, humanity. I don't like that about you. I'm going to change something, or I'm going to change myself to reflect that. In our last movement, photorealism, the artist tries to portray a more real than real experience. So this is kind of back to like glorifying the human body, and the human individual is so inherently important, even with all its flaws or weirdness or uniqueness. Like, that is what makes people people, and that's what makes humanity special. So, for example, on the left, on the left, the artist decided, okay, I'm going to emphasize these freckles, right? Because he wants you to see that even though this is not necessarily, beauty standards, that this person is beautiful, this individual is important. And something about photorealism is that the artist gets to, while they are trying to be as accurate as possible, they get to emphasize what they think is important. And in this case, it is the woman's freckles. Another key feature of photorealism is that humanity in and of itself is correct, and it's the way it should be. And trying to portray that in the most accurate way is a tribute to humanity and a tribute to who people are. So to kind of sum up, art and history have always been connected. Art and people have always been connected. People change, art changes with it. It reflects the current climate. And humanity is always represented in art. The human form doesn't necessarily have to be there for the human to be represented. Art is the representation of people in their time glorifying what they deem as important. Thank you.